Three house pets, a golden retriever, a parakeet, and a cat, die and go to heaven. As with all good animals, God decides to have a personal discussion with each one to determine where they will stay in heaven. God turns to the dog and says, "The book of life indicates you've been a very good boy. But tell me, in your own words, what are your ultimate principles? What do you believe in?" The dog says, "I believe in loyalty, companionship, and love. I've been a cherished part of my owner's family for many years." God smiles warmly. "Truly, you have a pure and loving heart. You shall sit at my right hand." He then turns to the parakeet. "And what do you believe in?" "I believe in color, flamboyance, and music," the parakeet replies. "For many years I've displayed my beautiful feathers and filled my owner's home with song." God nods approvingly. "Your beauty is truly magnificent, and your song shall echo through the universe. You shall sit at my left." Finally, God turns to the cat. "And you, majestic little predator, what do you believe in?" The cat lazily surveys God's throne, then looks at God with a smug expression. "I believe you're in my seat." A wealthy man decided to go on a safari in Africa, taking his faithful dog along for company. One day, while the dog is chasing butterflies, he realizes he's wandered too far and gotten lost. As he's wandering, he suddenly spots a tiger charging toward him, clearly intending to make him its next meal. The dog thinks, "Boy, I'm in big trouble now." But then he notices some bones on the ground nearby. He quickly settles down and starts chewing on them, facing away from the approaching tiger. Just as the tiger is about to leap, the dog exclaims loudly, "Man, that was one delicious tiger. I wonder if there are any more around here." The tiger stops dead in its tracks, panic taking over, and it slinks away into the trees. "Whew!" the tiger mutters to itself. "That was close. That dog nearly had me." Meanwhile, a monkey who had been watching the scene from a nearby tree sees an opportunity. He rushes to the tiger, hoping to make a deal for his own protection. The monkey spills the beans about the dog's trick and strikes a deal with the furious tiger. The tiger, seething with embarrassment, says, "All right, monkey, hop on my back. Let's see what happens to that conniving dog." Now the dog spots the tiger coming with the monkey on its back and thinks, "What am I going to do now?" Instead of running, he sits down, facing away from them as though he hasn't noticed their approach. As they get closer, the dog says, "Where's that monkey? I can never trust him. I sent him off half an hour ago to bring me another tiger, and he's still not back." The tiger, horrified, turns tail and flees. John went to visit his 90-year-old grandfather, who lived in a very secluded, rural area of Saskatchewan. After spending a great evening chatting, the next morning his grandfather prepared a breakfast of bacon, eggs, and toast. However, John noticed a film-like substance on his plate and asked, "Are these plates clean?" His grandfather replied, "They're as clean as cold water can get 'em. Just go ahead and finish your meal, sonny." For lunch, the old man made hamburgers. Again, John noticed tiny specks around the edge of his plate that looked like dried egg and asked, "Are you sure these plates are clean?" Without looking up from his work, the old man said, "I told you before, sonny, those plates are as clean as cold water can get 'em. Now don't you fret, I don't want to hear another word about it." Later that afternoon, as John was about to leave to go to a nearby town, his grandfather's dog started to growl and wouldn't let him pass. John yelled, "Grandfather, your dog won't let me get to my car." Without taking his eyes off the football game on TV, the old man shouted, "Cold water, go lay down now, you hear me?" An out-of-work mime visits the zoo, hoping to earn some money as a street performer. He begins to gather a crowd, but before he can get started, the zookeeper grabs him and drags him into his office. The zookeeper explains that the zoo's most popular attraction, a gorilla, has suddenly passed away. Fearing that attendance will plummet, he offers the mime a job to dress up as the gorilla until they can find a replacement. The mime agrees. The next day, he puts on the gorilla suit and enters the cage before the zoo opens. To his surprise, he finds that it's a great gig. He sleeps all day, plays around, and even mocks the visitors, drawing more crowds than he ever did as a mime. But soon enough, the novelty wears off, and he gets bored of just swinging from the tires. Noticing that the lion next to him is getting more attention, the mime decides to up his game. He climbs to the top of his cage, crawls across the partition, and hangs over the lion's enclosure. This infuriates the lion, but delights the crowd. The zookeeper notices the increased crowds and rewards the mime with a raise. For weeks, this continues. The mime taunts the lion. Crowds get bigger, and his salary keeps going up. But one fateful day, as he's hanging over the lion's cage, he loses his grip and falls into the lion's enclosure. The mime panics, running in circles with the furious lion hot on his heels. Terrified, he starts screaming, "Help! Help me!" Suddenly, the lion pounces, and the mime finds himself on his back, staring up at the lion. The lion leans in and whispers, "Shut up, you idiot. You want to get us both fired?" The other day, I ran into my friend Tim and told him about a crazy dream I had. It was just one thing. A giant glowing number 5 made of gold shining like the sun. Intrigued, Tim listened as I told him that when I woke up, I checked the horse racing schedule. And wouldn't you know it, the 5th horse in the 5th race was named the 5th element. I took it as a sign, so I did everything in 5s that morning. I ate 5 bowls of cereal, drank 5 cups of orange juice, ran 5 miles, and took a 5-minute shower. I even dressed in the 5th shirt I found and parked in the 5th stall of the 5th row at the racetrack. I went to the 5th betting window and put down $555 on the 5th horse in the 5th race. Then I sat in the 5th row of the bleachers, making sure I was surrounded by exactly 5 people on either side. Tim was grinning by this point. "So, did your horse win?" I shook my head. "Nah, stupid thing came in 5th. 2 sisters, one blonde, one brunette, inherited a ranch, but after a few years they ran into financial trouble. Desperate to save the ranch from foreclosure, they scraped together their last $600 to buy a bull for breeding. Before leaving for a distant stockyard, the brunette tells her sister, "If I buy the bull, I'll send a message so you can hitch the trailer and come get it." She arrives, finds the perfect bull, and negotiates with the seller. He agrees to sell it for $599. Nearly wiping out her funds. With just $1 left, she heads to the telegraph office to send a message. The clerk informs her it's 99 cents per word. Realizing she can only afford a single word, she thinks hard, then nods. "Send my sister the word comfortable." The clerk looks puzzled. "How will she know that means to bring the trailer?" The brunette smirks. "She's blonde, she'll read it slowly. Comfortable." A ridiculously handsome man believed he had a God-given duty to find the perfect woman so they could create extraordinary children. Determined, he searched high and low along the East Coast but found no one who met his impossibly high standards. So he headed west. One day, he met a farmer with 3 breathtakingly beautiful daughters, each more stunning than the last. His heart raced as he explained his noble quest. The farmer shrugged. "Well, you're in luck. They all want to get married. Take your pick." Excited, the man took the first daughter on a date. The next morning, the farmer asked how it went. "She's gorgeous," the man admitted, "but she's just a wee bit, not that you'd hardly notice, pigeon-toed." The farmer nodded. "Try the second one." So the man took the second daughter out. The next day, the farmer asked again. "She's stunning," the man said, "but she's just a wee bit, not that you'd really tell, cross-eyed." The farmer nodded again. "Well, try the third one." That night, the man took out the third daughter. The next morning, he burst into the farmhouse, beaming. "She's perfect. Absolutely perfect. I want to marry her." The wedding was arranged immediately, and a few months later, the baby was born. But when the proud new father saw the baby, he was horrified. The child, while undeniably cute, had the ugliest face he had ever seen. Panicked, he confronted the farmer. "How is this possible? With our looks, this baby should be gorgeous." The farmer sighed and said, "Well, she was just a wee bit, not that you'd hardly notice, pregnant when you met her." Farmer Rick was in a car accident, and now he was in court being grilled by the trucking company's lawyer. "At the scene of the accident, didn't you tell the officer, 'I'm fine'?" the lawyer demanded. Rick scratched his head. "Well, see, I had just loaded my favorite mule, Bessie, into the—" "I don't need details," the lawyer snapped. Just answer the question. Did you or did you not say you were fine? Rick tried again. Like I was saying, I had just gotten Bessie into the trailer and was heading down the road when— Your Honor, the lawyer interrupted. This man told the officer he was fine, but now he's suing my client. I believe he's being dishonest. The judge, now intrigued, turned to Rick. I'd actually like to hear about this mule, Bessie. Rick nodded gratefully and continued. Well, I had just loaded Bessie into the trailer and was driving along when this huge semi ran a stop sign and plowed into me. I got thrown into one ditch and Bessie got thrown into the other. I was hurting real bad, barely able to move, but I could hear poor Bessie moaning. I knew she was in rough shape. Then the highway patrolman arrived. He heard Bessie groaning, walked over, took one look at her, pulled out his rifle, and shot her between the eyes. Then he crossed the road, rifle still in hand, looked at me and said, "How are you feeling?" Rick shook his head. Now what the heck would you say? Two Texas farmers, Jim and Bob, were sitting in a bar enjoying their beers. Out of nowhere, Jim said, "You know what, Bob? I reckon I'm going to go to college." With that, he left the bar and headed straight to the local college, where he met the dean of administration. "All right, Jim," the dean said. "You'll be taking 4 classes: English, math, science, and logic." Jim scratched his head. "Logic? What the hell is that?" The dean smiled. "Let me give you an example. Do you own a weed whacker?" Jim puffed out his chest. "Darn right I do." "Well, if you own a weed whacker, then logically speaking, you have a lawn." "Shoot, yeah, I got a lawn." "And if you have a lawn, then logically, you must have a house." "Yep, sure do. And if you have a house, then you probably have a family." "Yeah, I got a wife and kids. And if you have a wife, then logically speaking, you're heterosexual." Jim's eyes widened. "Well, I'll be damned. You figured all that out just 'cause I got a weed whacker." The dean nodded. "That's logic for you." Excited, Jim rushed back to the bar where Bob was waiting. "Bob, I'm taking 4 classes in college: English, math, science, and logic." Bob squinted. "Logic? What the hell is that?" Jim grinned. "Let me give you an example. Do you own a weed whacker?" "Nope." "Then you're gay." A young cowboy from Montana heads off to college. But halfway through the semester, after blowing through all his money, he starts to panic. Then he comes up with a brilliant plan. He calls home. "Dad, you won't believe what they're teaching at college these days. They've got a program that teaches dogs how to talk." His father is stunned. "No way, how do we get old Blue in that program?" "Just send him down here with $1,000 and I'll get him enrolled." Excited, the father wires the money and ships Ole Blue off to college. A couple of months later, the money runs out again, so the cowboy calls home. "So how's Ole Blue doing?" his father asks. "Dad, it's incredible. Not only is he talking, but they've had such success, they're now teaching dogs to read." "Read? That's unbelievable. How do we get Blue into that class?" "Just send $2,500 and I'll sign him up." His father doesn't hesitate. He wires the money, but now the cowboy has a big problem. By the end of the semester, his father will expect a talking, reading dog, and that ain't happening. So he thinks long and hard, and finally, he gives the dog away to a loving family. When he gets home for summer break, his father is beyond excited. "Where's Ole Blue? I can't wait to talk to him." The cowboy sighs. "Dad, I got bad news. Yesterday, just before we left, Ole Blue was sitting in the recliner reading the Wall Street Journal, like he always does. Then he looked up at me and asked, 'So, is your daddy still messing around with that little redhead down the street?' His father goes pale, then bright red. 'Son, tell me you shot that lying dog before he could talk that nonsense to your mother.' The cowboy nods. 'I sure did, Dad.' His father slaps him on the back. 'That's my boy.'" At NC State University, 4 sophomores were acing their organic chemistry class. They had top grades in quizzes, midterms, and labs, so by the time finals week rolled around, they were feeling pretty confident. So confident, in fact, that they decided to spend the weekend partying with friends at the University of Virginia. They had an amazing time, so amazing that they slept through all of Sunday and didn't make it back to Raleigh until Monday morning, well past their scheduled final exam. Rather than face the consequences, they came up with a plan. They found their professor and spun him a story. "Professor, we went to UVA to study with some friends, but on the way back we got a flat tire. We didn't have a spare and couldn't get help for hours. That's why we missed the final. Can we take a makeup exam?" The professor thought it over, then nodded. "All right, you can take the final tomorrow." The students breathed a sigh of relief and studied hard that night. The next morning, they arrived at the exam room. The professor separated them into different rooms, handed them their test booklets, and told them to begin. Flipping to the first page, they saw a simple question on free radical formation, worth 5 points. Easy. Each thought, feeling confident. Then they turned to the next page. Written in big, bold letters. For 95 points, which tire was flat? Two college students accidentally miss their math final exam. The next day, they both go to plead with their professor. Feeling generous, the professor agrees to let them retake the exam, but with one condition. They'll have an oral exam the next day. When they arrive, the professor tells one to wait outside while he starts with the other. The first student waits by the door, trying to listen in. The professor begins, "You're riding in a train car and you start to feel too hot. What do you do?" The student answers, "I open the window." "All right," the professor continues. "The window is 2 feet wide and 3 feet high. The train is traveling at 50 miles per hour heading north, and the wind is blowing at 15 miles per hour from the east. How long will it take for the new air to replace the old air in the car?" The student stares blankly and stumbles. I don't know." The professor nods, writes down an F, and dismisses him. The second student enters, and the professor asks the same initial question. "You're riding in a train car and it gets too hot. What do you do?" The second student says confidently, "I'll take my jacket off." The professor presses, "Okay, but it's still too hot. What now?" The student thinks for a moment, then replies, "I'll take my shirt off." The professor says, "It's still unbearable." The student smirks, "I'll get naked." The professor is impressed with the answer, but adds, "But there are people in the car. What if your grandmother or the priest is there?" The student pauses, looks the professor dead in the eye, and says, "With all due respect, Professor, there is no way I'm opening that window." Three friends, a professor, a CEO, and a janitor, go on a hike in a forest. Suddenly, they come across a glowing ball of light that transforms into a beautiful fairy. The fairy speaks, "I will grant you each one wish, but first, you must each do someone else's job for a day. You'll be given all the resources you need." The professor, feeling confident, says, "I'll be an elementary school teacher. How hard can teaching a bunch of 6-year-olds to read be?" He's instantly teleported to a classroom. A few minutes later, the sound of children screaming drives him to the edge, and in frustration, he throws his supplies across the room, gives up, and storms out. Next, the CEO says, "I'll be a waiter. All I have to do is carry food back and forth. Easy." He's teleported to a busy restaurant. After an hour of dealing with annoying customers, one plate drops, then another. Finally, he loses it, smashes a stack of plates on the floor, and quits in a huff. Finally, the janitor says, "I'll be an artist." He's transported to an art studio and gets to work, creating a massive exhibit. He glues all the classroom supplies and smashed plates to a canvas, telling the entire story behind it with deep symbolism, and it's a huge hit. The exhibit sells for $1 million. After the day is over, the fairy congratulates the janitor. "You succeeded, but how were you able to do all that?" The janitor shrugs, grinning. "I have a master's degree in art." A physics professor had a student, Michael, who was always late to class and seemed to have an excuse for everything. The professor decided to put him on the spot and asked, "Tell me, Michael, what's faster, light or sound?" Michael quickly responded, "Well, light, obviously." The professor raised an eyebrow. "All right, why's that?" Michael grinned and said, "Well, when I turn on my TV, I first see the picture, then the sound comes after." The professor sighed deeply, giving Michael a look that said, "Seriously?" He moved on to the next student. What's faster, light or sound? The student replied confidently, sound. The professor blinked in confusion. Sound? Why? The student answered, when I turn on my TV, I hear it first, then the picture comes later. Frustrated, the professor thought the question might be too difficult for these students, so he decided to change it up a bit. He asked the next student, you're standing at the foot of a mountain. On top, there's a cannon being fired. Do you first see the light from the cannon, or do you hear the sound? The student replied without hesitation, obviously, you see the light first. The professor, slightly relieved, nodded and said, yes, and why is that? The student replied matter-of-factly, well, the eyes are obviously further ahead than the ears. One evening, a guy sent his wife a text saying, I'll be home tonight. After a long day at work, he finally arrived, eager to see her. But as he stepped into the bedroom, he was shocked to find her lying in bed with another man. Furious and heartbroken, he shouted, I want a divorce! Just then, his mother-in-law, who happened to be visiting, overheard the commotion. She poked her head in and asked, what happened? The husband, still fuming, explained, I texted her that I'd be home tonight, and look what I found. His mother-in-law raised an eyebrow and replied, now hold on there, sweetie, you never know. Maybe she didn't even get your message. A student marches up to his professor, holding his graded exam. Professor, why did I get an 80? The professor looks it over. Because that's what you deserve. The student thinks for a second. Tell you what, if I bite my own eye, will you bump it to an 85? The professor chuckles. If you can do that, sure. Without hesitation, the student pops out his glass eye and bites it. The professor, stunned, sighs and marks the exam 85. But the student isn't done. If I bite my own nose, will you make it a 90? The professor smirks. You can't pull off your nose. Want to bet? The student removes his dentures and bites his own nose. The professor, now in complete disbelief, shakes his head and marks the exam 90. But the student has one final offer. If I get up on this table and pee the perfume Coco Chanel on you, will you give me a 100? Now the professor is curious. All right, let's see it. The student climbs onto the table and pees all over the professor. The professor, dripping wet, sniffs his soaked shirt. This isn't Coco Chanel. This is just pee! The student grins. Fine, let's leave it at 90. An arrogant professor boards a plane and takes a seat next to an old man. Mid-flight, the professor decides to play a game with the old man to prove his intellectual superiority. He turns to the old man and says, Hey, want to play a little game? The old man looks at him curious. Depends. What kind of game? The professor grins, excited for an easy win. We take turns asking each other questions. If the other person knows the answer, the asker gives them $1. If they don't know it, they give $1 to the asker. Sound good? The professor is sure his vast knowledge will crush the old man. To his surprise, the old man refuses. Determined to win, the professor ups the stakes. All right, if I lose, I'll give you $2 instead of $1. The old man shakes his head. $5? No. $10? I told you no. The professor, now desperate, offers a final deal. If I lose, I'll give you $100, but if you lose, you only give me $1. The old man thinks for a moment, then sighs. Fine, but I get to start. The professor, confident he's about to outsmart the old man, immediately agrees. Ask away. The old man asks, What has 5 heads, 40 feet, and lives inside a bucket? The professor is stumped. He spends the next hour thinking, trying to find a logical answer, but can't figure it out. Finally, frustrated, he pulls out his wallet and hands the old man $100. Grinning, the professor demands, All right, what has 5 heads, 40 feet, and lives inside a bucket? The old man smiles back calmly. I've got no idea. Here's your $1. A married couple wakes up one morning, and while still lying in bed, the wife turns to her husband and says, Maybe you shouldn't go to work today. The husband, confused, replies, What do you mean? Why shouldn't I go to work today? The wife explains, I think you've been working too hard. Instead of going to the office, maybe you should take a few days off, pack a suitcase, and go stay with a friend for a little getaway. The husband thinks for a moment and decides to take her up on the suggestion. Within minutes, he's up, dressed, and starting to pack his suitcase. "Just out of curiosity," the husband asks while packing, "how did you come to the conclusion that I've been working so hard that I need a break?" The wife looks at him and says, "You were dreaming about your work all night." The husband, surprised, asks, "Really? How do you know I was dreaming about work?" The wife smirks and replies, "Because every 2 minutes you were shouting your secretary's name." A large corporation hires a tribe of ex-cannibals, giving them full employee rights but making it clear, you're not allowed to eat anyone. Things go smoothly for several weeks, but then the CEO calls the tribe into his office and says, "One of our employees has been missing for a few days. I hate to ask this, but did you eat them?" The chief of the tribe consults with his people and responds, "No, sir, we haven't eaten anyone. We've left that part of our lives behind us." The CEO remains skeptical, but with no evidence, there's nothing more he can do. He apologizes for his suspicion and sends them back to work. Once they're out of the office and away from the other employees, the chief turns to his tribe and asks, "Okay, which one of you idiots ate someone?" One of the tribesmen sheepishly raises his hand and admits, "I ate the cleaning lady." The chief is furious. He slaps the man and exclaims, "You fool! We've been eating department heads, marketing executives, and efficiency consultants for weeks, and nobody noticed. But you had to go and eat someone they'll actually miss!" A Japanese company and a Swedish company decide to hold a rowing competition as a publicity stunt. Both teams train diligently. When the competition arrives, the Japanese team wins by 1 kilometer. The Swedish company's leadership is shocked, but instead of accepting defeat, they decide they must save face and request a rematch for the following year. The Japanese team agrees. Immediately, the Swedish team begins investigating why they lost. The company sets up a special task force. After months of examination, the report is clear. The Japanese team had 1 person at the helm while the rest were rowing. On the Swedish team, 1 person was rowing while the rest were at the helm. Based on this, the company hires a consultant to dig deeper into the issue. After several more months of analysis, the expert conclusion is that there were too few people rowing and too many people at the helm. Armed with this knowledge, the Swedish company quickly implements changes. 2 steersmen, 2 senior steersmen, a captain, and a rower. The rower is also enrolled in a bonus system to motivate him to perform better. A year later, the rematch happens. To everyone's surprise, the Japanese win again, this time by 3 kilometers. The Swedish company's leadership knows exactly what to do next. They fire the rower for poor performance, give large bonuses to all the managers for their efforts to solve the problem, and for the next year, decide to design a better boat. My Job History, a series of unfortunate puns. My first job was at an orange juice factory, but I got canned. I just couldn't concentrate. So I tried being a lumberjack, but I couldn't hack it. So they gave me the axe. Next, I became a tailor, but I wasn't suited for it. Plus, it was just a so-so job. I gave Starbucks a shot, but I got tired of the same old grind. Then I tried being a chef, thinking it would add spice to my life, but I just didn't have the time. A deli job came next, but no matter how I sliced it, I couldn't cut the mustard. I gave music a go, but I just wasn't noteworthy. I even studied to be a doctor, but I had no patience. A stint at a shoe factory didn't work out. I just didn't fit in. Fishing seemed promising, but I couldn't survive on my net income. Pool maintenance, too draining, a gym job. Turns out I wasn't fit for it. After years of struggling, I finally landed a job as a historian, then realized there's no future in it. My last gig was in a muffler factory, but that was just too exhausting, so I finally gave up and retired, and I have to say, I'm perfect for the job. 3 technicians walk into an interview at a telephone company, all highly qualified. The boss tells them, "You 3 look great on paper, but I need to see what you've got in practice. I want you to go out and set as many telephone poles as you can today. Come back tomorrow and report your numbers." The next day, the 3 guys report back. The boss asks the first, "How many poles did you set?" The first guy proudly replies, 13. 13? Wow, impressive, says the boss. The second guy steps up. "I set 9. Well, still good, just not quite as much as the first guy. The boss turns to the third guy. How many did you set? The third guy grins, blonde hair swaying. Two. Two? Only two? What were you doing all day? The third guy shrugs. I didn't want to be a snitch, but these guys, they only put their poles halfway in.